in the middle of a final walkthrough for a wedding worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, the bride pressed both hands into the 5-tier cake and crushed it in front of everyone. The baker stood a few steps away and watched 11 hours of his team's work collapse in seconds. The bride laughed, demanded a refund, and ordered him thrown off the property. What she did not know was that the quiet man she had just humiliated owned the entire estate where her wedding was about to take place. When the truth surfaced, who would pay? Rosewood Manor sat at the end of a long gravel drive in the Georgia countryside, half an hour from the noise of Atlanta. The house was old in the way that money kept old, with white columns, washed clean every season, and gardens that someone trimmed before dawn, so the guests would never see the work. People who came here for weddings assumed the place had always belonged to some forgotten family. They were wrong, but the man who could correct them rarely bothered to. Jacob Carter had bought the estate 4 years earlier, quietly through a holding company that carried none of his name. He was 36, a widower, and he had learned a long time ago that the less people knew about what he owned, the more honestly they behaved around him. He liked watching people without the filter that wealth put over their faces. So he kept his name off the deed, kept his clothes plain, and let the staff handle the parts of the business that required a tie. What carried his name instead was cake. Years before the manor, before any of it, he had opened a small bakery with a used oven and a line of credit he was afraid to look at. He worked the counter himself in those days, and he worked the kitchen at night, and slowly the work got noticed. Brides in the right circles began asking for the man who made the cakes that looked carved rather than baked. By the time he could afford the estate, his name meant something to people who would never have shaken his hand if they had met him behind the counter. He had built both halves of his life with the same hands, and he kept the two halves apart on purpose. The bakery took bookings for weddings at dozens of venues across the state, and Rosewood Manor was simply one of them. When a couple hired the manor and then hired his bakery for the cake, the two contracts arrived through different offices and looked on paper like the work of two different strangers. No one had ever connected them. No one had needed to. Olivia Bennett had hired both without knowing she had hired the same man twice. She came from the kind of family that did not earn money so much as inherit the assumption of it, and she moved through the world expecting rooms to arrange themselves around her. Her wedding to Liam Hart was the event of her season, and she had spent on it the way some people spend to be seen spending. The manor was the backdrop. The 5-tier cake was the centerpiece. Both, in her mind, existed to make her look like the woman she believed she already was. The final walkthrough was scheduled for the early afternoon, a few hours before the ceremony, while the staff dressed the ballroom and the first vendors began arriving. It was a routine Jacob had watched 100 times from the edge of a room. Unremarked, a man in a clean apron, checking that the cake had survived the drive. He preferred to deliver the important pieces himself. It kept him close to the work, and it kept the work honest. He arrived that afternoon in a gray shirt and an apron carrying the top tier in a box, while two of his people brought the rest. The cake was assembled in the side hall off the ballroom, 5 tiers rising in clean ivory, the sugar work done by hand over 11 hours. Jacob had stayed at the bakery until well past midnight, finishing the uppermost flowers himself because the bride had asked for something specific, and he did not like to hand specific things to anyone else. Olivia swept in 20 minutes late, trailing 2 bridesmaids and the wedding coordinator, a calm woman named Diane, who had worked the manor for 3 years and had learned to keep her face still no matter what the clients did. Olivia was already in motion, already talking, already finding the room insufficient. She stopped in front of the cake and looked at it, the way a buyer looks at a horse she has decided not to want. "This isn't what I asked for," Olivia said, before she had looked at it long enough to know what she had asked for. She circled it, once heels loud on the stone floor. "The flowers are wrong. The whole top is wrong. It looks homemade." Jacob set the box down and folded his hands in front of his apron. "The design matches the order you signed, ma'am. The sketches and the color samples were approved in writing 6 weeks ago. I can bring the file if it would help." She turned to look at him then, and he watched the moment she decided he did not matter. It was a small thing, a flick of the eyes from his face to his apron, to his hands and back, and whatever she found there told her she was speaking to a person beneath her notice. "And who are you?" she said, not really asking. "You made this." "I did." The corner of her mouth moved. She glanced at her bridesmaids the way a person glances at an audience before performing. "Of course you did. Look at you. They sent the help to argue with me about my own wedding." She said the word "help" slowly, so everyone in the room would catch it. One bridesmaid laughed, uncertain. Diane's expression did not change, but her grip tightened on the clipboard against her chest. Jacob had been spoken to like that before in the early years, by people who could smell that he had nothing yet. He had taught himself a long time ago not to answer that voice with the heat it was looking for. "The cake is exactly to specification," he said evenly. "If there's something you'd like adjusted, I can note it. But it isn't damaged, and it isn't wrong." That was the wrong word to give her. Wrong was hers to assign, and a man in an apron did not get to take it back. Something in her face hardened from contempt into decision. She set down her small white purse on a side table, smoothed the front of her dress, as if she were about to do something delicate, and stepped up close to the cake. "Let me show you wrong," Olivia said. She placed both hands flat against the second tier and pushed. For a strange half-second, nothing happened, the structure holding, and then it gave all at once. The upper tiers folded inward and slid, and she pressed harder, dragging her palms down through the sugar flowers Jacob had built by hand the night before. Ivory fondant tore. The dowels that held the weight snapped sideways. The whole 5-tier tower came apart and dropped onto the stone floor in a sound like something being broken on purpose, because it was. The side hall went silent. One of the bridesmaids covered her mouth. Diane took a single step forward and then stopped because there was nothing left to step toward. The cake was a ruin across the floor, 11 hours of work flattened in the time it takes to draw a breath. Olivia stepped back, breathing a little fast, and looked down at her hands. Frosting clung to her fingers and the heels of her palms. She laughed a bright laugh that did not match the wreckage at her feet, the laugh of someone who had just proved a point and expected applause for it. "There," she said. "Now it matches what I think of it." She lifted her chin toward Jacob without looking at him directly. "I want a full refund, every dollar, and I want him off the property before my guests arrive. I will not have the help standing around looking at me like that on my wedding day." She wiped her hands on a cloth napkin one of the bridesmaids hurried to give her and tossed it onto the mess. "Diane, handle it." Jacob did not move toward the cake. He did not raise his voice, and he did not let his face show the thing that was moving underneath it. He looked once at the ruin on the floor, the flowers he had finished after midnight, now pressed into the stone, and then he looked at the cameras in the upper corners of the side hall, the cameras that were his, in a house that was his recording, in a system that fed to an office down the corridor that also belonged to him. "I understand," he said quietly. That was all. Diane glanced at him, surprised by the calm, and he gave her the smallest nod, a signal she had learned to read over 3 years, without ever fully understanding who he was. He turned to the 2 bakery workers standing frozen by the boxes. "Pack up the tools. Don't touch the floor yet. Leave everything exactly where it is." His voice stayed level, almost gentle, and that flatness did more to quiet the room than any shouting would have. Olivia mistook the calm for surrender. She had won, and the proof of winning was that the man had folded without a fight. She collected her purse, told her bridesmaids the florist was waiting, and swept back toward the ballroom, with the satisfied energy of a person who has put the world back in its proper order. The bridesmaids followed. The laugh she had laughed seemed to hang in the hall after she was gone. Jacob stood among the wreckage for a moment after the doors closed. Then he walked unhurried down the corridor to the office that the wedding clients never saw, the one with the bank of monitors and the filing cabinets that held every contract the manor had ever signed. A young man named Marcus sat at the desk, the estate's day manager, the only person on the property that afternoon, who actually knew whose name was behind the holding company. He stood up when Jacob came in. "I saw it on the feed," Marcus said carefully. "All of it. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry. I can have her removed in 5 minutes if you want. Don't remove anyone yet." Jacob pulled out the chair beside him and sat, eyes already on the monitors. "Pull the footage from the side hall. Last 20 minutes. Save 3 copies and lock the originals so nothing gets overwritten. I want the audio kept too." He spoke the way he spoke in the kitchen, one clean instruction at a time, no waste in it. Marcus worked the keys. The footage was clear. Olivia circling the cake, the contempt on her face when she looked at the apron the moment she set down her purse, both hands going flat against the second tier, the push. The microphones had caught all of it. The word "help," the bridesmaid's nervous laugh, the demand for a refund, the order to throw him off the property. There was no version of the event in which she had not done it on purpose. The recording made that plain. "Now bring me the file," Jacob said. Both files, the venue contract and the bakery order. Hers. Marcus retrieved the folder. Jacob laid the 2 contracts side by side on the desk and read them the way he read everything, slowly, finger moving down the page. The bakery order was clean on his side. The design matched the approved sketches exactly. The colors matched the signed samples. There was nothing she could honestly call wrong. The destroyed cake had been delivered to specification. That settled the question of the refund. He owed her nothing. The venue contract was where she had hurt herself. Jacob knew its terms better than anyone because he had written half of them. He moved down the clauses, and one after another, they confirmed what he already suspected. There was a clause holding the client responsible for any deliberate damage to property or vendors on the grounds. There was a conduct clause that allowed the manor to suspend or cancel an event for behavior that endangered staff or other guests, with the deposit forfeited and a penalty owed on top. There was a clause that required the client to settle in full any vendor dispute that arose on the property before the event proceeded. She had walked into all 3 in under 2 minutes, in front of a camera, with the audio running. He sat back and looked at the frozen frame on the monitor, the bride mid-push frosting on her hands, the laugh not yet on her face. She did not know any of this. She believed she had spent the afternoon teaching a tradesman his place. She did not know that the tradesman owned the floor she had ruined, the walls. She stood between the cameras that had watched her do it and the contract that now sat open on his desk, with her signature at the bottom of every dangerous page. She had no idea the ground had shifted under her, because in her version of the day, the ground belonged to her. Marcus watched him read and said nothing for a while. Then quietly, "What do you want to do?" "The ceremony is in a little under 3 hours. There are nearly 200 guests on the way. Some are probably on the road already." He let the weight of those numbers sit in the room. "If you cancel, it's not just her. It's all of them. It's the day." Jacob did not answer right away. He closed the venue contract and squared its edges against the desk, and he looked at the 2 paths laid out in front of him as plainly as the 2 folders. He could end it now. He had the footage. He had the clauses. He had the standing. One word to Marcus, and the manor would close its doors to the event, keep the forfeited deposits and the penalty notice, and let the woman who had crushed his work in front of her bridesmaids explain to 200 arriving guests why there would be no wedding. It would be clean, and it would be lawful, and after the afternoon he'd had, no one would say it was unfair, or he could hold the door open a few inches longer. He could let her keep digging until the people around her could no longer pretend not to see, and then put the choice back into her hands where it belonged, and see whether there was anything in her capable of choosing differently. He was not sure there was. The laugh suggested there was not. But ending it now would only prove that the man with the power could break her day the way she had broken his cake. And that was the one thing he had spent his whole quiet life trying not to become. "Don't cancel anything yet," Jacob said at last. "And don't tell her who I am. Not a word to anyone. If she asks about the cake, she gets nothing. No refund. No apology. Nothing moves until I say so." He stood and unfastened the apron, folded it once, and set it on the back of the chair. The gray shirt underneath was as plain as the apron had been, and somehow that made the change in him harder to name. "Tell the kitchen to keep the ceremony on schedule for now. Tell Diane to carry on as if everything is normal." Marcus frowned. And then, in a little while, you're going to ask Ms. Bennett to come to this office to discuss a problem with her contract." Jacob looked at the frozen frame one more time. "I'd like to be sitting in this chair when she walks in." He left the office the way he had moved through the whole afternoon, without hurry and without heat, a quiet man in a plain shirt, walking down a hallway he owned. Behind him, the monitors kept their frozen image of a bride who believed she had won, and who had no idea that the only thing she had actually done was hand the man she despised every card in the deck. For the next hour, Olivia moved through Rosewood Manor as though the afternoon had gone exactly her way. She had the florist rearrange the centerpieces twice, sent back a tray of glassware she decided was spotted, and told Diane the lighting in the ballroom was too warm. Each demand was issued with the easy confidence of a woman who believed she had already proven in the side hall that the staff existed to bend to her. The crushed cake had not troubled her at all. If anything, it had reassured her. She did not ask what had happened to the baker. In her mind, he was already gone, escorted off the grounds with his refund denied or granted. It hardly mattered which. He had been a small obstacle, and she had removed him, and removing obstacles was simply what people like her did. The idea that the man in the apron might still be on the property sitting in an office she did not know existed would have struck her as absurd. The help did not linger after they had been dismissed. Her certainty was complete because she had no information to puncture it. She knew the manor as a backdrop and the baker as a tradesman, and both fit neatly into a world she had never once had reason to question. Money on top, service beneath, and herself comfortably near the summit. That was simply how the world was arranged, and nothing in the past hour had disturbed the arrangement. She had pushed against it, and it had given way exactly as it always had. Diane carried on as instructed, smiling, taking notes, absorbing the complaints without comment. Twice she stepped out to the hallway and exchanged a few quiet words with Marcus, and twice she returned with her composure intact. The other staff had been told the same thing. Keep the day on schedule, say nothing about the side hall, behave as though the cake had simply been an unfortunate accident that would be handled. The performance held. Olivia noticed none of the strain underneath it, because she had never learned to look for strain in the faces of people she did not consider real. The guests began to arrive. Cars came up the gravel drive in a slow procession, and the valets the manor had hired for the day moved among them. Inside, the string quartet was tuning. 200 people, give or take, were converging on the estate to watch Olivia Bennett marry Liam Hart, and the machinery of that day was now running on a schedule that Jacob alone had the power to stop. Olivia felt the gathering crowd as confirmation of her own importance. She did not feel it as a vulnerability, though that was what it had become. It was Marcus who came to find her, a little over an hour after the side hall, while she was inspecting the head table. He was polite and unhurried, a young man in a dark suit she had never seen before, and would not have remembered if she had. "Miss Bennett," he said, with the small deference she expected from everyone. "There's a problem with your venue contract that needs your signature before the ceremony can proceed. The office is just down the corridor. It will only take a few minutes. The word contract irritated her more than it worried her. She assumed it was paperwork, some clause about the damaged cake, some attempt by the manor to recover the cost of a thing she considered worthless anyway. "Fine," she said, and followed him, already composing the speech she would give about how she would not be paying for a cake she had every right to reject. She was sharpening her grievance as she walked, and so she gave no thought at all to the door Marcus opened for her. The office was small and plain, lit by the cold glow of monitors along one wall. There was a desk in the center of the room, and behind the desk in the chair sat the man she had thrown out of her wedding an hour before. He was not wearing the apron now. He wore the same gray shirt, and his hands were folded on the desk, and he was looking at her with the same calm he had shown in the side hall, the calm she had read as weakness. For a moment the sight did not make sense to her. The baker was supposed to be gone. The baker did not belong behind a desk in a manager's office, in the chair that the most important person in any room was meant to occupy. Her mind reached for an explanation and found none, and the speech she had been sharpening dissolved on her tongue. "Miss Bennet," Jacob said quietly, "please sit down. We have a few things to discuss." She did not sit. "What is this?" It was not a question. Her eyes went to Marcus, who had stepped to the side of the room, and then back to the man at the desk. "Why is he here? I told you people I wanted him removed. Is this some kind of—" The word she wanted was trick, but it caught in her throat, because tricks were played by people with power, and the man in front of her was supposed to have none. "Watch the screen, please," Jacob said. He gave a small nod toward the wall, and Marcus turned one of the monitors to face her. The footage played without sound at first. The side hall, the 5-tier cake herself, circling it in her wedding day heels. She watched her own face flick from contempt to decision. She watched herself set down the white purse, smooth the front of her dress, step up to the cake, and press both hands into the 2nd tier. She watched the tower fold and slide and drop. Then Marcus raised the volume, and the room filled with the sound of her own laugh, bright and pleased, and her own voice saying the words, "I want him off the property, and I will not have the help standing around looking at me like that." Olivia's face changed as she watched it, though not in the direction Jacob had hoped. The color rose in her cheeks, but it was the color of anger, not shame. "So you filmed me," she said. "In a private moment at my own wedding without telling me. That's—" She turned to Marcus again, looking for the seam she could pull on. "That's illegal. You can't record people without consent. My family has lawyers who will—" "The cameras are posted at every entrance and in every public room of this estate," Jacob said, and his voice did not rise. "There are signs at the door and a clause in the contract you signed. The recording is lawful, and it isn't the point. The point is what it shows." He drew the 2 folders toward him across the desk and opened them so the pages faced her, though she made no move to read them. "You crushed a cake that was delivered exactly to the design you approved in writing. I have the signed sketches and the signed color samples. There is nothing wrong with the work, which means there is no refund owed to you. That question is closed." "I don't care about the cake," she snapped. "It was a hideous cake, and I was right to throw you out. Whoever you are, you've made a mistake bringing me in here. Do you have any idea who my family is, not older?" "I do," Jacob said. "I read your file. I know exactly who your family is." He let the simple fact of it settle, and then he said the thing he had brought her into the room to say. "What you don't seem to know is who I am. My name is Jacob Carter. I own the bakery that made your cake." He turned the venue folder a few degrees toward her. "And I own Rosewood Manor, the whole estate. The hall you stood in the floor, you ruined the cameras that recorded it. All of it is mine." The room went very quiet. Olivia's mouth opened and then closed. The thing she had been certain of an hour ago, money on top service beneath the baker, safely at the bottom, collapsed in her mind, the way the cake had collapsed under her hands all at once, after a strange half-second of holding. The man she had called the help, the man she had thrown off the property, was the property. He had been the most powerful person in every room she had walked through all afternoon, and she had spent that afternoon performing her contempt for him in front of his own cameras. "That's not," she started and could not finish. Her eyes moved across the monitors, the desk, the two contracts, searching for the version of events in which she was still standing on top. There was none. Marcus stood quietly by the wall and did not help her find one. "You don't have to believe me," Jacob said. "Marcus has the ownership documents if you'd like to see them right now. Your family's lawyers can trace the company that holds this estate back to me, but it will take them a good deal longer than the evening you have left." He turned to the venue folder and moved his finger down the page, the same slow reading he had done an hour before. "While they're tracing it, let me tell you what the contract you signed actually says, because that's the part that affects your evening. There's a clause that holds you responsible for any deliberate damage to property or to vendors on these grounds. You'll see it there with your signature beneath it. There's a conduct clause that lets this estate suspend or cancel an event for behavior that endangers or abuses staff. And there's a clause that requires you to settle any vendor dispute on the property in full before your event is permitted to proceed." He looked up at her. "You triggered all three this afternoon, on camera, with your own hands, in front of witnesses." He closed the folder gently. "So the situation is this. I am within my rights right now to cancel your wedding, keep your forfeited deposit, send your family the penalty, and let your 200 guests find out from the valets that there will be no ceremony. That is the lawful outcome of what you did in my side hall an hour ago." The threat landed, and for the first time, something other than anger moved across Olivia's face. But it did not become surrender. It became calculation. She had spent her whole life learning that almost any problem could be made to go away if enough money or enough pressure was applied to it, and that lesson rose up in her now as instinct. "How much?" she said. "That's what this is, isn't it? You want to embarrass me and then you want a check. Fine. Name the number. I'll have it wired before the ceremony, and we can both pretend the cake never happened. This isn't about a check." "Everything is about a check," she said, and there was a sneer trying to come back into her voice, the old confidence reaching for its footing. "You're a businessman. You said so yourself. You own a bakery and a barn with columns. You didn't bring me in here to teach me a lesson. You brought me in here because you saw a wedding worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you smelled an opportunity. So stop performing and tell me what it costs to make you disappear." Jacob looked at her for a moment, and something in his calm shifted, not into anger, but into a kind of weariness, as if she had confirmed something he had been hoping she would not. "I have more money than this wedding is worth, Ms. Bennett," he said simply. "I didn't build any of it by smelling opportunities in other people's bad afternoons. You can't buy your way out of this because I'm not selling. The only thing on the table is whether you understand what you did and to whom." "I know exactly what I did," she said, lifting her chin. "I rejected a cake I didn't like. The rest of this is you abusing a contract because your feelings were hurt. Bring me my fiancé. Bring me my mother. Bring anyone with sense and they'll see this for what it is." She turned toward the door as if the matter were settled by her deciding it was. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by a baker about respect. Marcus." Jacob said, "Ask Diane to come in. Bring the 2 bridesmaids who were in the side hall and the 2 from my team who packed up the cake." He kept his eyes on Olivia. "You'd like witnesses with sense. Let's have them." The bridesmaids came first, the same 2 who had followed Olivia all afternoon, and the change in them was the first crack Olivia could not explain away. They came in subdued, unable to meet her eyes, and when Jacob asked them plainly what they had seen in the side hall, neither of them reached for the version Olivia wanted. The taller one, a woman named Hannah, who had known Olivia since college, said quietly that, yes, Olivia had pushed the cake over on purpose. And yes, she had laughed. And yes, she had called the man the help. The other nodded along miserable and added that the cake had looked beautiful. Before that, she hadn't understood why Olivia did it. Hannah, Olivia said, and her voice cracked on the name. What are you doing? Whose side are you on? There aren't sides, Hannah said, looking at the floor. You did it, Liv. I watched you do it. I'm not going to stand in front of cameras and say you didn't. Diane came in next, calm and exact, and confirmed the same account, without ornament, the professional doing her job. The two bakery workers came in behind her and stood near the wall, saying little their presence enough. One after another, the people Olivia had assumed would arrange themselves around her, instead arranged themselves around the truth, and the truth did not flatter her. She looked from face to face and found in each of them the same quiet refusal to lie for her. These were her own people, her friend, her coordinator, the staff she had ordered around all day, and not one of them would stand between her and what she had done. It was the loneliest she had ever felt in a crowded room. The world she had trusted her whole life, the one where her wealth bought her not just service, but agreement, had quietly stopped functioning, and she had not noticed the moment it failed. She had walked into this office certain she held every card. She was beginning to understand that she held none, and that the man behind the desk had been letting her discover this for herself, rather than telling her outright, which was somehow worse. Then the door opened again, and Liam Hart walked in. Marcus had gone for him last on Jacob's quiet instruction, and Liam came in confused, still in his shirt sleeves with the boutonniere not yet pinned, asking what the problem was and why his bride was being kept in an office an hour before their wedding. Jacob rose and offered him the chair, and Liam did not take it, looking instead at Olivia's face, which told him before any footage did that something had gone badly wrong. "Liam," Olivia said, quickly reaching for him. "Don't listen to them. There's been a misunderstanding. The venue is trying to extort us. I'll explain everything once we—" "Mr. Hart," Jacob said, and the calm in his voice cut cleanly through hers. "I think you should see this for yourself, and then you can decide what's a misunderstanding." He nodded to Marcus, and the monitor turned once more to face the door, and the footage began to play from the start. The cake. Whole, the bride circling it. The contempt. The purse set down, the two hands pressed flat against the second tier. Liam watched in silence as his bride crushed the cake with her own hands. He watched her laugh. He heard her call the man, the help, and demand he be thrown off the property. He watched the whole thing through to the end, while Olivia stood beside him, saying his name. And when it finished, he did not look at the screen anymore. He looked at her, and the expression on his face was not anger. It was something deeper and more frightening than anger, the look of a man recognizing for the first time that he did not know the person he had been about to marry. Liam asked for the room. He said it quietly, without looking away from Olivia, and Jacob understood the request for what it was. He rose from the chair, gave Marcus a small nod, and the office emptied without ceremony. The bridesmaids first, then the two bakery workers, then Diane, then Marcus, and finally Jacob himself, who closed the door behind him and left the two of them alone, with the frozen image still glowing on the monitor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Olivia reached for the speech she had been building all afternoon, the one about misunderstandings and extortion and lawyers, but the words had nowhere to land now. Liam had seen the footage. There was no version of the story left for her to tell him that he had not already watched with his own eyes. "I can explain," she said finally, and even she heard how thin it sounded. "I don't think you can," Liam said. He sat down on the edge of the desk, not in the chair, as if he did not want to settle into anything in that room. "I watched you do it, Olivia. I watched your face. That wasn't a woman who lost her temper. That was a woman who was enjoying herself." He looked at his hands. "I keep trying to find the part where it's not what it looks like, and I can't." "It was a cake," she said. "It was an ugly cake, and it wasn't about the cake." His voice stayed low, and that was what frightened her, because Liam was not a man who went quiet when he was angry. "You called a man the help in front of people, and you laughed while you destroyed something he spent 11 hours making. And the only reason any of this matters to you now is that he turned out to own the building. If he'd really been a baker, just a baker, the way you thought, you wouldn't feel a thing right now. You'd be furious that you got caught. That's the part I can't get past. The accusation landed because it was true, and she knew it was true the moment he said it." She had not felt the smallest flicker of regret in the side hall. She had felt regret only when the man behind the desk said his name, and the floor turned out to be his. Her shame, such as it was, had arrived attached to a price tag. It had cost her nothing to humiliate a tradesman and everything to learn he was not one. "Answer me one thing," Liam said. He looked at her directly now. "And don't perform it. I've watched you perform all day, and I didn't even notice until an hour ago." He drew a slow breath. "Do you actually respect anyone? Or do you only respect what people can do for you? Their money, their name, what they own? Because if it's the second one, then everything you've ever said to me you said, because of what I have, not because of who I am." It was the question she could not get around, and she felt it close over her like cold water. She wanted to say, "Of course I respect people," the way she had said 100 reflexive things in her life, but the word stuck because for the first time, someone had asked it of her in a room where lying would not work. The footage on the monitor would not let her lie. The faces of her own friends who had refused to lie for her an hour before would not let her lie. And Liam, watching her search for the comfortable answer, watched her fail to find one. In that failure, something opened in her that had been closed her whole life. She saw very suddenly and very clearly what she actually was. She was not a victim of an extortion scheme. She was not the most important person in the room or in any of the rooms she had moved through that day. She was a woman who had built her entire sense of herself on standing above other people, and who had just discovered that the foundation was not the world's regard for her wealth, but her own contempt for everyone she had decided was beneath it. The estate had not collapsed on her. Her own arrogance had. "I don't know," she said at last, and it was the most honest sentence she had spoken in years. I think you might be right. And I don't know how to be right now." Liam looked at her for a long moment. The anger had drained out of his face and left something more tired in its place. "At least that's true," he said. He stood up from the desk. "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but whatever happens with this wedding, you need to go back in that room and face the man you did this to. Not because he owns the place, because you'd owe him the same thing if he owned nothing at all." He went to the door and opened it. "I'll be outside." He left her alone with the frozen monitor. Olivia sat down in the chair Jacob had offered her. When she walked in the chair, she had refused, because sitting felt like surrendering. She did not feel powerful anymore, and the strange thing was that the powerlessness didn't feel like the catastrophe she had always assumed it would be. It felt more than anything like the first quiet moment she'd had in years. When she came out, the others were waiting in the corridor. Liam, Diane, the 2 bridesmaids, the 2 bakery workers, Marcus and Jacob, who stood a little apart with his hands in his pockets, watching her without expectation. She asked Marcus quietly if they could all go back into the office. She did not phrase it as an order. None of them had ever heard her ask for anything before, and the difference in her voice was enough to make them follow without a word. Inside, she stood in front of the desk instead of behind it, and she made herself look at the man she had thrown off his own property. "Mr. Carter," she said. Her voice was unsteady, and she let it be unsteady. "I need to say this in front of everyone because I did it in front of everyone." She drew a breath that shook. "I destroyed your cake on purpose. It wasn't ugly. It was beautiful, and I knew it was beautiful. and I ruined it anyway, because I wanted to feel like I had the right to. I called you the help, and I meant it as an insult, and the only reason I'm standing here apologizing is that I found out you weren't who I decided you were. That's the worst part of it. I'm ashamed of all of it, but I'm most ashamed of that." The room was silent. Hannah's eyes were wet. Diane held her clipboard against her chest and said nothing. Olivia turned slightly, taking in the 2 bakery workers standing near the wall, the ones who had packed up their tools an hour before in the wreckage of their own work. "I owe you an apology, too," she said to them. "You made something with your hands, and I treated it like it was nothing, and I treated you like you were nothing, and I was wrong. The cake was a piece of work that took real skill, and I knew that, and I broke it anyway. I'm sorry." Jacob listened to all of it without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, weighing not whether she was sorry he believed that she was, but whether the sorrow had cost her anything real, or whether it was simply the price of being caught. He decided it did not matter as much as what came next. Apologies were words. He had built his whole life on the principle that a person was measured by what they did when no one with power was watching, and he extended the principle now to its other half. A person could also be measured by what they were willing to do once they finally understood the cost. "I accept your apology," Jacob said. "I do. But an apology doesn't restore a cake, and it doesn't undo a contract." He drew the venue folder toward him one more time. "You damaged property and abused a vendor on these grounds on camera with witnesses. The contract you signed makes that your responsibility. I'm not going to cancel your wedding, but you're going to make it right, all of it. The full cost of the cake, the labor of the team you humiliated, and the damage clause in the venue agreement. Every dollar of it settled before the ceremony, the same way you offered to wire me a bribe a few minutes ago. The difference is that this isn't a payment to make me disappear. It's the bill for what you actually did." "Yes," Olivia said at once. "Of course, all of it." "And one more thing," Jacob said. "It's not in the contract. I can't make you do it. But I'd like my team to hear it." He nodded toward the 2 bakery workers near the wall. "Those 2 stood in my side hall and watched a stranger destroy their work for sport. Whatever you wire me means nothing to them. So before you walk out of here, I'd like you to mean the apology you just gave them and not the one you gave me." Olivia turned fully to the 2 of them. Then, and this time, she did not perform it. She told them she was sorry in the plain way. A person is sorry when there is nothing in it for her. And the taller of the 2, a young man who had said nothing all afternoon, nodded slowly and accepted it. It was a small moment, and no money changed hands in it, and it was the only part of the entire afternoon that Jacob would later remember as mattering. The arrangements were made quickly after that. The penalty and the cost of the cake and the team's labor were settled before the hour was out transferred through the same accounts that had been ready to send a bribe. Jacob signed the release that allowed the event to proceed. There would be no 5-tier centerpiece. There was no time to rebuild one, and Olivia did not ask for one, which Jacob noted. The wedding would go on without its showpiece, and somehow that seemed fitting to everyone in the room. Liam took Olivia aside in the corridor before the ceremony. Whatever passed between them was theirs, but those nearby saw that he did not call it off. He had watched his bride do an ugly thing, and then he had watched her do something he had never once seen her do in all the time he had known her, stand in front of a room full of people with nothing left to gain and tell the truth about herself. It was not enough to erase what came before. But it was enough, he decided, to be the beginning of something rather than the end of it. He told her he would marry her, and that he would also be watching for a long time to see whether the woman who came out of that office was the woman he had glimpsed for the first time in 15 years. The wedding took place that evening. In the ballroom, Olivia had complained was too warm beneath the lighting she had ordered, changed twice. 200 guests watched her marry Liam Hart and saw nothing of the afternoon that had nearly undone them both. The day was beautiful the way Rosewood Manor always made days beautiful, and no one among the guests ever learned why there was no cake at the center of the room. Olivia walked into her marriage carrying a lesson she had paid for at full price, and she carried it the way a person carries a thing they intend to keep. She had spent her whole life believing that respect was something owed upward to people with names and money and withheld from everyone below. In the space of a single afternoon, she had learned that the man she had decided was beneath her had been above her the entire time, and that the truth of him had nothing to do with the deed in his file. He had been worth respecting when she thought he was a baker. That was the part she would not be allowed to forget. Jacob did not attend the ceremony. He changed out of the gray shirt left Marcus to oversee the evening and drove back to the bakery in Atlanta, where there were orders for the next morning and an oven that did not care who he owned. He thought on the drive about how close he had come to canceling the whole thing in the first hour, and he was glad he had not. Ending her day would have proven only that the man with the power could break what he wished, the same lesson Olivia had been living by her entire life. Holding the door open a few inches longer had cost him nothing, and had made room for the one outcome that mattered, the chance, however small, that she would choose differently when the choice was finally hers. He had never told her who he was for the pleasure of the reveal. He had told her because the truth had been the only thing left that might reach her after money and pressure and performance had all failed. And in the end, it was not even the truth about the deed that had reached her. It was a question her own fiancé had asked her in an empty room about whether she respected anyone at all. The estate had only been the thing that forced her to sit still long enough to hear it. The next morning the bakery opened, as it always did, and Jacob worked the early hours himself the way he had since the beginning. A young couple came in to discuss a cake for a small wedding they could barely afford, and they spoke to him carefully, the way people speak to someone they assume is just the man behind the counter. He did not correct them. He took their order, sketched what they wanted on the back of a receipt, and gave them more of his attention than their budget could have purchased anywhere else in the state. He had learned the lesson long before Olivia Bennet ever walked into his side hall, and he lived by it, whether anyone was watching or not. The measure of a person was never the name on the deed or the figure in the account. It was how they treated the people they believed could do nothing for them in the rooms where no one important was watching, when there was no advantage in being kind. He had built 2 lives on that single idea, and he intended to keep it quietly. For the rest of them, a baker, to anyone who needed him to be one, and never in any hurry to be anything more.